So today I want to talk about the Canon R3 and its place in the market in 2024. Now this is a camera I've been using for the last couple of years. I pre-ordered this camera, got it on release day, and have been shooting with it ever since. And I genuinely love this camera. I have shot all over the world with this thing. I've shot hundreds of thousands of images, dozens of video projects. And really until the FX3 joined my lineup here late last year, this camera has been the camera I have used for all of my professional work. Now the FX3 is doing a little bit more of the heavy lifting in terms of video, but the R3 is still a massive part of my workflow, and I really enjoyed this camera. But I do want to talk a little bit more about some details of the R3 and specifically a few pros and cons I have on it, just comparing it to other cameras that other camera manufacturers have released and other cameras that even Canon has released over the last couple of years, and see how the R3 stacks up and is it still really worth the investment in 2024. So right off the bat, a couple of the things I really love about the R3 is just its outstanding photo quality. This camera is arguably one of the best, if not the best, photography camera I have ever used. Just the images that come out of this thing, the sensor quality, the low light performance, is just a really good photography camera. This camera was built for sports, it was built for action, it was built to be a high performing beast of a camera, and it absolutely excels in those categories. This camera has served me so well across the country, out of the country, and as a photography camera, I think it absolutely still holds its own in 2024. Another thing I have mentioned a bunch in other videos about the R3 is just the insane autofocus capabilities that this camera has. I have yet to use a camera that I like the autofocus better than the R3. It's just so intuitive, it's so easy to use, and it's so stupidly fast to lock on and just track subjects all the way through the frame. I've genuinely not had a better autofocus experience on any other camera that I've used, really ever. And that's across photo and video. Video autofocus and photo autofocus are just insane. Speaking of video, that's one of the huge draws to the R3 for me. The fact that this is a 6K sensor. I can actually record 6K RAW internally on this camera, so I don't have to export to an external monitor to get 6K RAW, which is really fantastic. Our little gripe with the camera is you can't actually export 6K RAW to an external recorder. You can only do that internally. But the fact that you can do 6K RAW internal on this camera with the memory cards that it has makes this camera so versatile in terms of a really high performing, high resolution camera. But the 6K sensor makes the 4K image even better, and the versatility the R3 has in terms of video codecs and resolutions is really fantastic. Just the menu system is so easy to navigate to be able to go in and just go, all right, I want to shoot 4K all I want to shoot either 120 or 60 or 30 or 24 or 2398, whatever that looks like. It's so easy to kind of switch between modes and to be able to shoot 4K DCI with just a click of a button. I just love the ease of use of the R3 when it comes to video. And last little thing about this camera, I just love the build quality. It's a super rugged camera. It's a super well-built camera. It's a weather-sealed camera. And I can just trust that when I take this camera out in the field, no matter what the weather conditions I'm shooting in are, this camera's going to perform how I want it to. I've shot literally in like torrential rain on the mountain in Scotland. I've shot in snowstorms and ice storms. I've shot in blazing hot sun, and I've never had an issue with this camera overheating and shutting down on me. I've never had an issue with the camera like freezing up or getting water damage or anything. It's just so nice to be able to trust that whenever I pull this camera out, it's going to perform in whichever situation I put it in. It's just been a really dependable camera, and still a camera I absolutely still turn to time and time again when I want a camera I can trust. And what's crazy to me is that even 2 years later, I still have a really powerful camera that can match up with really what other camera manufacturers have put out over the last couple of years. The R3 is still performing at or better than some of those cameras. And there's not really other cameras in the market that can beat just the versatility, dependability, the ruggedness, and just the speed at which this camera operates. And honestly interesting, so I just released a video about the A9 III versus the R3 and just some of my kind of initial thoughts and comparisons on those two, because I am using the FX3 more, and I really am looking for potentially a Sony camera to come in and just allow me to streamline my kit a little bit more. And the A9 III is the kind of the closest camera I've been able to find to the R3. And really interesting because I watched Jared Poland's video on the A9 III, and he specifically compared the A9 III to the R3, which is why it was a very interesting video for me. And just looking at the sensor performance between the R3 and the A9 III, the A9 III obviously is still not even released yet, and the R3 came out over 2 years ago. These cameras are head to head on a lot of different things. And it's honestly sometimes the R3 is kind of edging out the A9 III in some specific categories. And I don't want to get into a whole debate about camera gear and which camera is better, which camera brand is better. That's not the point of this. But all that to say, the R3's camera sensor is still a fantastic sensor 2 years plus after release date. It's still holding its own even against newer cameras that have come out. And so I think if you're looking for a really quality camera sensor, the R3 absolutely performs in that category. That said, there are definitely some things I don't like about this camera. There's some things that I've seen in other cameras that kind of make me go, all right, is the R3 actually still worth it in 2024? So let's talk about those. So the first major thing is on the photography angle, this is a 24 megapixel camera, which is totally sufficient for everything that I shoot. But honestly, it would be really nice if this camera was in the mid 30s in terms of megapixels, especially when you compare the R3 to other cameras from like Sony and Nikon that just have more megapixels and more resolution that they're putting out. I know it doesn't change the quality of the photo immensely, but it would just be nice to be able to have a little bit more pixels to work with in terms of cropping and all that. Does it really change the game for me? Not really. But it would just be nice to be able to have a little bit more detail. And honestly, that's something I think Canon has kind of strayed away from in general in their cameras. Again, it's not a deal breaker, but it's definitely something I wish I had a little bit more resolution than what I do. On the video side of things, there's a few things I really wish this camera had, and that's one of the reasons why I ended up buying the FX3. It's because the R3 didn't have these. Number one is integrated LUT support. I really, really wish the R3 would do what they do in like the cinema line of cameras, like the R5C, any of the cinema cameras from Canon, and just allow you to have a user embedded LUT. I don't know why that's not a thing in Canon cameras that aren't technically their cinema cameras, because Sony does it on like all of their cameras. You can buy a little cheap vlogging camera and you have integrated LUT support on that camera, which just makes shooting and filming so much easier. Canon does have what they call like their view assist or whatever. It kind of gives you an idea, but it's definitely not nearly as accurate as like embedding an actual user LUT into your video so you can see what it's going to look like on the monitor when you record. And it's something that's really kind of steered me away from using this camera as my primary video shooter because I just can't trust the image. It seems like that would be a really easy integration, especially for a camera of this caliber and of this price point. And honestly, it's one of the reasons I've gone with the FX3 as my video camera, because there's embedded LUT support. Now, could I use a monitor on this camera? Absolutely. But my gripe is that so many other cameras have integrated LUTs directly in the camera body. This one doesn't, and I don't understand it. Another thing I wish this camera had is C-Log 2 versus just having C-Log 3, just to get a little bit more dynamic range, a little bit flatter of a curve would be really, really convenient. I know it's not a cinema camera, but I just don't understand why there isn't certain offerings in this camera. I just wish they had more log options in the R3, kind of being locked to C-Log 3. It's okay, it's a great log profile, you can get a lot out of it, but I just wish there was a little bit more, especially from a camera of this price point and of this caliber. Speaking of, my final gripe on this camera is just the price. Even in 2024, this camera has come down a little bit from like the $6,500 it was. Now you can get it for like the high fives or like mid 5,000s if it's on sale, but that's still a lot of money to pay for a camera, especially when you have cameras like the Canon R6 Mark II, which has like the same sensor, the same autofocus system, a lot of the same features of the R3, and costs a fraction of the price. And so it's a little bit hard to justify the cost of the R3 compared to a camera like the R6 Mark II that actually beats the R3 in a few specs. Even in terms of like performance and speed, the R6 Mark II can actually outperform the R3 with the same sensor, the same autofocus system, a lot of those same things. It's hard to justify, like, should you spend the extra money to get the R3 if the R6 Mark II can do a lot of those things and even a few of those things a little bit better? It becomes a little bit hard to justify the price. Hey, just a quick little note here from me as I'm editing this video. So I just popped over to the B&H website and it looks like they just did a price drop of $1,000 on the R3. So now it's coming in at $49.99. So basically $5,000 for this camera instead of $5,500 or $6,000. So that's obviously a much better deal on the R3 and definitely makes it more appealing as a camera. So yeah, I just wanted to update that since the price has come down since I recorded that. I just wanted to make sure that that was included in this video. All right, back to the video. So those are my overall thoughts on the R3, and that kind of leads me to the question, is this camera still worth it in 2024? And honestly, I would say yes, but with an asterisk. As a photography camera, it's still a phenomenal camera. The camera sensor in this camera still stacks up against most other cameras on the market and actually outperforms similar cameras in a lot of different ways. The image quality out of this camera is incredible. Low light performance is amazing. Autofocus is insane. Video versatility is really, really fantastic. And so just overall as a camera, this camera is a really, really high performing, powerful camera. But, and this is my asterisk here, it definitely doesn't offer some of the video features that I would love to see from a camera of this price point. The price point is definitely a bit high compared to what you can buy even from Canon at a lower price point that's very, very similar compared to the R3. And when you look at camera manufacturers like Sony and Nikon and others, there's definitely a lot of newer cameras on the market that come in at or under the price point of the R3 that offer very, very similar features. Now, is the R3 still a powerhouse in 2024 for a 2+ year-old camera to still be able to stack against some of the best cameras on the market right now? Absolutely. But is it worth $5,500 to $6,000 for this camera in 2024? You have to be the judge of that. For me, this camera is absolutely still going to be a staple of my professional work for the next few months at least. I'm definitely going to be trying out the Sony A9 III and some other Sony bodies just to see if I could streamline my kit just to one ecosystem, because bringing 2 sets of lenses and chargers and batteries and all that is a little bit annoying and a little bit frustrating. But I am so happy with the performance of this camera and really have no issues continuing to use this camera well into 2024 and being able to trust that the images and the video I get from this camera are going to be fantastic.